Hey everyone, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's tutorial is for an adorable, smaller crossbody purse. Today we're going over the Kaitlin purse from Kandou Crafts. Now this is such an adorable bag. It's a smaller size bag, it's not a huge bag. It has the option of being a shoulder bag or a crossbody bag. If you've been around for a while, you know I love a good crossbody bag. This purse has two slip pockets in the front, a zip pocket in the front. It has a magnetic clasp up top to keep the bag closed. And then there's a second zip pocket in the lining of the bag. So this is a bag I've been having a lot of fun with mixing up the type of material I use for the pocket, for the exterior, for the lining. On this bag right here, I used this beautiful brown cork for that outer pocket. I then just used a quilt cotton on the exterior panel in the front and on the exterior panel in the back. I used the cork for the strap as well. I do highly recommend that you use something sturdier for the strap and also for these D-ring connectors right here. And then for the lining, I just used quilt cotton. So this is the crossbody version I made. Now I want to show you the first version I actually made of this bag. So the first version was this really fun Christmas print fabric that I did here. You can see for the exterior, I actually used waterproof canvas and I used quilt cotton for that outer pocket. I then used quilt cotton for the lining as well. The nice thing about waterproof canvas is that you don't have to interface it with anything. It has a really nice structure and shape to it, so it helps the bag hold its form really, really well. I will tell you that on this bag where I used quilt cotton for the exterior, I actually did line it with Decoville Light, and it made it a little bit more challenging to work with. So if you're really comfortable working with Decoville Light, definitely give that a shot, because if you are using quilt cotton for the exterior, you want to beef it up just a little bit more. However, if you're not used to working with Decoville Light, but you still want to have a nice firm shape to your bag, I do highly suggest you use waterproof canvas for the exterior of your bag. In today's tutorial, we're going to switch it up even more. We're actually going to use quilt cotton for the exterior, vinyl for the pocket, and waterproof canvas for the lining, because I want to see if the waterproof canvas as lining will still help it keep its shape the way that it does as the exterior fabric. So thank you so much to Caroline from Kandou Crafts for allowing me to film these tutorials. I absolutely love Kandou patterns. If you haven't already checked out her shop, make sure you go over to Etsy and check it out. I will have a link for her shop down in the description of this video. If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, anything you want to say, leave them down in the comment section of this video. Pinned to the very top of the comment section will be a comment from me, and it will have timestamps for every part of this video. So if you're following along with the pattern and there's just one step you're interested in, click on the number next to that step and it will take you straight there in the video. All right, let's get started. So let's talk about what we need to make this bag. First, you're going to need a ½ yard of exterior fabric. Today, I am working with some of the most beautiful fabric I've ever seen. This beautiful stitch fabric was sent to me from Hapa Fabrics. By the time you see this video, this fabric may not be available anymore. I do suggest you go and join the Hapa Facebook group so you'll be alerted as soon as this and other prints are released. You're also going to need a fat quarter of contrasting fabric. Now this is going to be for that front pocket. Today I'm using this really cool orangey vinyl from My Punk Embroidery. I'm also using this vinyl for the D-ring connector straps as well as the strap for the bag. So I am using a whole roll of vinyl for this bag today. For the lining, you're going to need a ½ yard of fabric. I am using waterproof canvas. I love waterproof canvas because it holds its shape really well. And the biggest reason is because I don't have to add any interfacing to it. I like to skip that step. So waterproof canvas is a winner in my book. Now you can get very creative with your interfacing here. The pattern calls for 1 yard of woven interfacing. This is Woven Fuse from Got Interfacing. I'll have a link for it down in the description of this video. Now you can interface all of your quilt cotton pieces, and that will add a lot of structure to the bag. You can also use some Decoville Light for the exterior pieces to add extra structure. I do warn you though, it does make it a little bit more difficult to sew the bag. Not really difficult, just a little bit more challenging. You could also use fusible fleece for the exterior of the bag to give it a really nice shape. Just work with what you have for this bag. This is a great beginner bag. I will be using this woven fuse on all of my quilt cotton pieces. And then I have this Decoville light because I'll be using scraps of this for installation of the magnet. You can use scraps of whatever you want. It can be Decoville heavy, Decoville light, fusible fleece, whatever kind of beefier interfacing you have, you'll want to use that because depending on what you're using as your exterior fabric, you could be installing your snaps to quilt cotton. So you just want to beef it up a little bit to protect the quilt cotton from ripping over time with use. Okay, you're gonna need 2 7-inch zippers. I love using my zipper tape. This is plastic zipper teeth, easy to sew over, easy to cut. So I'll be using zipper tape today, as well as these 2 adorable zipper pulls. This is all from Wizardry Stitchery. You're also gonna need a magnetic clasp. I didn't even realize they made these colorful magnetic clasps, but I happen to have this in my sewing room, so I'm going to be using this rainbow clasp today. You're gonna wanna use 3/4 inch D-rings. And depending on what strap you're using, you're gonna have different hardware. So since I'm making the crossbody strap, which is gonna be a 1-inch wide strap, I have 2 1-inch swivel hooks and 1 1-inch slider. So here's all the other stuff. I'm gonna be adding some rivets to my strap today. These are optional, but they give a really beautiful finish to that. So these are my rivets here. This is my bag label that I like to add on most of my bags. I get these bag labels from Inked Paper over on Etsy. I have a link for them down in the description. Lots and lots of clips. I always have a healthy amount of clips on hand. This Dritz 1/4 inch double-sided tape is great for installing the zippers. I have 2 different threads here, one for my top needle and one for my bobbin. My top needle is this Mara 70. This is just a little bit thicker thread and it looks really, really good when you top stitch with it. For the bobbin, because the bobbin doesn't really like thicker thread, I have Mara 100. You're gonna need a seam ripper, and a seam ripper stiletto is a great option here to help you feed everything through your sewing machine. And then I always have 2 different marking tools on hand, one white chalk pencil that I use for marking on dark fabric, and then an air erasing sew line marker that I use for marking on lighter colored fabric. So now let's quickly go over the pattern pieces. You'll notice for pattern piece A, you have this large sheet. You're gonna have 2 cuts of your main fabric. So for me, it's that beautiful quilt cotton. And then you're also gonna wanna interface that with your woven interfacing. Once you have your exterior fabric cut out, you're actually going to fold along this dashed line up here. Just fold the pattern piece, just like that. And now, trace out your lining pieces with this pattern piece. Your lining pieces should be shorter than the exterior pieces. I'm using waterproof canvas today for my lining, so I'm not going to have to interface this with anything. If you're using quilt cotton, you don't need to interface it, but that's totally up to you. I know some of you guys love to interface every single thing that is quilt cotton. Pattern piece B is going to be that front pocket. For the exterior of the front pocket, I'm using this very fun orangey sherbety vinyl. And for the lining of that front pocket, I have my waterproof canvas. Now pattern piece C is a little bit different depending on which version of this pattern you have. Caroline did update this part of the pattern. So if you purchase this pattern before August 10th, 2020, this is gonna look different for you. Now you can keep it as the original pattern has it, but I will be showing the updated version of her pattern today. So if you have the older version of this pattern, just give Caroline an email and she'll send you the new version, no problem. But from your pattern piece C, you're going to have 2 lining cuts. Now, if you're using quilt cotton for these pieces, she does suggest that you interface one of them with your woven interfacing, but you don't have to interface both of them. Again, if you want to interface everything, you go for it. The last pattern piece is going to be pattern piece D. This is the facing. This actually goes on the inside of the bag. It's the top of the lining. This is actually going to be from your exterior fabric. So I have my 2 quilt cotton cuts here, and I have both of them interfaced with my woven fuse. Now I have a few extra cuts of fabric here that there are not pattern pieces for. One is going to be your D-ring strap connector, and then the other 2 are going to be the strap pieces. Now she does give you measurements for this in the pattern. I will be building a strap. If you're using a piece of leather and you don't need to fold and build your strap, she gives you alternate instructions for that. We'll save this for the end of the tutorial. So the first thing we're gonna do is build that exterior pocket. So grab your 2 cuts from your pattern piece B. You can lay your exterior right side up. Take your lining and lay that right side down so that they're right sides together, and just line up all the edges. We're mainly focused on the top and bottom edges, so just go ahead and clip those in place. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along the top and bottom edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once you have the top and bottom sewn, you can go ahead and turn this so that it's right side out. And if you're using quilt cotton here, you're more than welcome to press this with an iron. Since most of my material is a little bit stiffer and I can't press that vinyl, I'm just going to roll those seams and push them out and then clip them down. So once you have your edges pressed or clipped, now we're going to top stitch, but only the top edge. So your top edge is the shorter edge. We're going to top stitch one row at an 1/8 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to go down to about a 1/4 inch seam allowance and sew a second row. So if you're using vinyl like I am that doesn't quite want to sit still on that bottom edge, before we attach this to the A unit, let's go ahead and just top stitch an 1/8 inch away from this bottom clipped edge, just so we have a nice flat panel to work with before we attach it to the exterior panel. So now grab your exterior main piece, panel A, and then measuring from that edge per the measurement given in her pattern, line up your ruler and then just lay the bottom edge of your pocket against the top of your ruler. And then make sure you're lining up the sides as well. They should line up pretty well. If it's not exact, that's perfectly fine. So now let's go ahead and clip along these side edges. I'll be honest with you, this vinyl is giving me a little bit of trouble. It's a little bulgy right now. I'm gonna see if we can still attach it in the middle without problem. So now if you already made that top stitching on the bottom of your vinyl, what we can do now is just go over that top stitching again and then do a second row of stitching about a 1/4 inch away. This will just hold down the bottom of the pocket really well. Alright, once you have this attached on the bottom edge to your exterior panel, now we just want to mark a midpoint line along the middle of our pocket. So if you grab your template B, you'll see that the midpoint line is already marked on there. What you can do is actually just fold it right along that middle line. And then line it up with the edge of your panel and then make sure it's also straight along the bottom edge of your pocket. And then just mark right along that midpoint line. My chalk pencil is not going to work on this vinyl, so I'm going to use my air erasing marker and just hope that it actually does erase with the air. Okay, so now I have my midpoint line marked. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch an 1/8 inch on the left and an 1/8 inch on the right, straight up that midpoint line. I do suggest you start at the bottom each time. Make sure you back stitch well at the beginning and the end because these will be seams that get tugged on. So starting at the bottom, going up, back stitching well, starting at the bottom again, going up, 1/8 inch on each side of the line. Once you have those two lines top stitched through the middle, you can go ahead and set this to the side. Next, we're going to work on that front welt pocket. If you're using quilt cotton here, this is going to be your panel C that has the woven interfacing attached. So take your C panel and lay it wrong side up, right side down. She has a cutout here you can use. You can cut this rectangle out and just line it up over your panel and trace to get your rectangle here. I'm going to show you my preferred method of installing these zippers. So first, we want to find the midpoint of that top edge. So go ahead and fold your fabric so that you have the top edge marked there. Now you can mark this with a pen or you can take scissors and make a very tiny clip on that edge so you have a tiny triangle. And now we're going to measure 1 inch down from that top edge. Use your marking tool. Remember, we're on the wrong side on the back of our fabric, and mark a line parallel to that top edge. Then take your ruler and measure 3/8 of an inch down from that marked line, and then draw another line parallel to that marked line. All right, and now we want this opening to be 7 inches wide. So I'm going to line up my 3.5 inch mark with my midpoint mark, and then I'll just draw a vertical line on the right. And then you can just line up your 7 inch mark with that vertical line you just drew and draw another vertical line, just so we have a nice 7 inch by 3/8 of an inch rectangle. Then you can take your ruler and then find the space right between the 1/8 and 2/8 inch ticks on your ruler. Line up that bottom line that you marked on your fabric in that space between those two ticks, and then draw another horizontal line. This is just to find the midpoint of that rectangle. And then you can extend some triangles on the corner. These can go out 3/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. I just eyeball it, honestly. Just making these nice triangles. There we go. Now grab your exterior panel with that pocket panel already on it. And we want to find the midpoint of this as well. So go ahead and fold that top edge in half to find that midpoint. Again, you can mark it or cut it. I'm going to cut it. And in the pattern, she gives you instructions on how far down this should go. Use your ruler to measure that distance down from the top edge. I like to use one of my grid lines and line it up with that midpoint line, just so it's easier for me to see where the midpoint is. Grab your pocket panel and lay it wrong side up so that you see your drawn rectangle. Line up the midpoint of your pocket panel with that midpoint grid line, just like that. Now you can use double-sided tape here or pins, depending on what material you're using. But we just want to pin this in place so that it doesn't move around at our sewing machine. We don't have to pin it a lot, just a couple spots. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along that inner rectangle. For me, it's a 3/8 of an inch high by 7 inch long rectangle. We're just going to sew around the entire thing. Don't worry about the midpoint line or those triangles. We're just sewing around the rectangle. Once you have that sewn down, now just grab your seam ripper and gently rip along that midpoint line that you marked previously. And you don't have to go far, just about an inch or so. You're just trying to make a hole big enough so that you can get your scissors in, and then cut along that midpoint line all the way to the tip of your triangle, and then follow the angled edges down to the corner of your stitching. You want to get right next to your stitching without actually cutting the thread. Do this on both sides of your triangle, and then repeat this for the other side of this rectangle. Now you can push through your pocket panel so that the pocket and the exterior are wrong sides together. Now we're going to press around this rectangle to get it nice and straight. So I like to finger press first. I usually just do one edge by finger pressing. If you have vinyl on your pocket like I do, let's go ahead and cover that up so that we don't accidentally melt it. So I've got some scrap fabric here. I'm just going to cover my vinyl like that. So just in case my iron hits it, I don't accidentally melt the vinyl. So once I have this finger pressed pretty well and straight, I'm going to run my iron over that edge. And then I'm just going to finger press the small edges of my rectangle. Make sure they're nice and straight. And then press that with my iron. And then I'll go ahead and do the other long edge of this rectangle, and then the rest of it. If you find that any of your corners are puckering or creasing, that means you didn't cut close enough to that corner, so you can just flip it back out and cut a little bit closer to those corner threads. And then once you have the front pressed, you can go ahead and press the back. Once you have your pocket all sewn on, now we just need to attach the zipper. So if you're using zipper tape here, I suggest cutting your zipper tape to about 9 inches just to make sure you have plenty of overhang. Remember, the hole is 7 inches, so your zipper tape needs to be longer than that. If you have a fun pull you're going to be using, this is going to be the pocket that is seen the most, so you might want to add that one to this pocket. Okay, so I like to lay my zipper right side up, and then with the zipper when closed on the left. So when I close my zipper, it goes all the way to the left. When I open it, I move it to the right, just like that. Now grab your double-sided tape and lay it along the edges of your zipper tape, like right along the edge. We don't want this to be seen in the end, so lay down your zipper tape, but don't take off the paper yet. Okay, so I'm just going to remove the bottom paper of this zipper tape, but I'm going to leave the paper on the top, and I'm going to push my pull so that it's up. The pulls like to get stuck to this double-sided tape, which is why I do it this way. Now grab that exterior panel with your hole for your zipper and center it over your zipper tape. You should have a good amount of overhang on both sides, and then just line it up so that the zipper teeth are straight. You can gently pull that pull out through your rectangle and then all the way towards the left. And that will help you align your zipper tape so that it's nice and straight in the middle there. Once you have this pushed down to one side of your zipper tape, you can fold up your panel, remove the paper from the other side of your zipper tape, and then just push that top edge down as well. So now your zipper should be peeking through that hole and centered on your tape. If you look on the back, you should have enough overhang on both sides. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch on the fabric around this rectangle at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. This is going to hold the zipper in place. Once you have your zipper attached, if you flip it so that it's exterior right side down and then the right side of your pocket up, what we can do now is we can hide this bottom edge of our zipper tape. So take your pocket and fold it all the way up so that it wraps around that bottom edge of your zipper tape. You can feel it with your fingers. Now all we have to do is go along that edge and just clip it with a few clips. We're making like a little sandwich right here. The bottom is your pocket, the top is the pocket, and in between them is that zipper tape. This is optional, but it gives it a nice clean finish so that you don't see that raw edge. And now what you're gonna do is just pinch your panels so that the clipped edge is over here on the right, and then you have your exterior and your pocket over here on the left. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along this clipped edge at anywhere between 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Use your zipper foot so you can get nice and close to the edge here. So once you have that stitched down, it should look just like this where the zipper is still attached on the front. Remember, we didn't stitch anything to the exterior when we did that with the pocket. But then on the back, when you press down this bottom seam, you won't see the raw edge of the bottom of your zipper. So you can press that down with an iron if you'd like, or just finger press it. Now take the bottom edge of your pocket panel and fold it up to meet that top edge. And then just clip along those two shorter edges to hold it in place. And then you can press down and clip along the sides as well. You will have a fold here on the bottom from that seam you just made, that's fine. Make sure you clip both sides. Now we can sew along these 3 clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. When you're at the sewing machine, sew with the right side of your exterior up and fold it out of the way so that you can see and make sure you don't accidentally sew on the exterior of your fabric. So once you have this pocket completely sewn, take your other remaining exterior panel without a pocket on it and lay it right side up. And then take your exterior panel with the pocket and lay that right side down, lining up all of the edges. Now go ahead and clip along the side edges and the bottom edge of your bag, making sure you're lining up all of the little curves and spaces. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to sew along these 3 clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Make sure you backstitch well at the beginning and the end of every seam. So on the top and the bottom edges, and the other side as well. These corners are not going to be sewn at all. We will be boxing those after we get done stitching this. go. Once you have the sides sewn together, if you have thicker fabric like I do, you might want to trim down the seam allowance to about 1/4 inch or just trim it down in half. I find that that thick pocket kind of pushes the fabric towards the side in the finished bag, so I like to just trim down the seam allowance a little bit. Okay, now we're going to box the corners. So grab one of your corners and pull along the corner of the fabric so that the top raw edges match up with one another. Take your seams and fold them in opposite directions. So the trick here is you want to pull this to get it as flat as possible along this edge, and then take one seam and push it to the right, and take another seam and push it to the left, however it wants to go. I like to clip the seams that are in opposite directions first, and then I'll clip out towards the edges. Again, just really working to try to keep this as flat as possible. Sometimes with thicker fabric, it kind of wants to bow. That will create a more rounded corner on your bottom. So flatter the better. Now flip over to the other side, and you want to take a look at your seam and see which way you folded that bottom seam. So my bottom seam is folded towards the right. So when I come to the next box corner and I pull, again, that bottom seam is going to go to the right, and then my other seam will go in the opposite direction. You just don't want this kind of a wavy seam in the end, so try to keep it consistent. And then again, I'm just really focused on getting this as straight as possible. And if you're worried about this kind of rounding off when you're at the sewing machine, tug on the sides of your bag to flatten it out, and clip on the sides of your bag as well. And this will just help keep everything straight at the sewing machine. There we go. So now let's take this to the sewing machine and sew along these boxed corner clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. If you're using thicker material, go ahead and do another row of stitches at a 1/4 inch seam allowance just to really reinforce this and allow it so that you don't see the stitches in the end. Once you have your corners boxed, if you want to trim down that seam allowance a little bit, you can. I'm actually going to leave mine. I find a bigger seam kind of helps keep everything poked in the right direction. All right, so now you can take your bag and turn it right side out. And this should start giving you an idea of what your bag is looking like. So since I'm using this quilt cotton, this bag is definitely a lot more squishy than a couple of the other bags I've made. I'm interested to see how the lining reinforces it, but we'll see. But it's a very, very cute bag so far. So you can go ahead and put this to the side for just a moment. Grab your D-ring strap connector and lay it wrong side up. Grab a ruler and a marking tool, and I'm just going to draw a line parallel to the long edges, a 1/2 inch away from each long edge, just like that. Now, depending on which version of the pattern you have here, this might be different for you. So whichever version of the pattern you have, just follow along with those instructions. I'm following along with the latest version of the pattern. If you're using the first version, this is actually cut at a different size and it's put together a little bit differently. Do it however you want. So now I'm going to fold this raw edge, wrong sides together, up to meet that marked line. If you're using fabric here, you can press this. If you're using vinyl, you can use clips here. So really we're just folding this edge a 1/4 inch in towards the wrong side. Now once you have these folded edges pressed or pinned, you're going to fold the entire unit in half. So I just fold it in half and include those folded edges in each other's clips, just like this. There you go. And once again, if you're using quilt cotton, you're more than welcome to press this with an iron. Since I'm using vinyl, I kind of have to finger press it. So now you see we have the raw edges folded in a 1/4 inch, and then we just have the basic center fold on the side. This should measure 3/4 inch wide at this point. Now we're going to top stitch along the clipped edge and along the opposite folded edge at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Once you have both of your edges top stitched, you can now just fold it in half, putting the short edges up against each other. Press on that midpoint mark and then just use scissors or rotary cutter to cut in half. This will give you 2 D-ring straps that should be about 2.5 inches by 3/4 of an inch. Grab your D-ring and wrap your strap along the straight edge of your D-ring. And then you can use a clip to hold it together along the bottom. Do the same on the other strap. And now we can quickly go to the sewing machine and just top stitch along the 2 short edges that we have clipped here just to hold it together. Sew along this edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once you have these straps top stitched, you can grab your exterior panel and find the seam connecting the front panel and the back panel. Take one of your straps and with the D-ring pointed down towards the bottom of the bag, center it over that seam. So if you kind of have to spread it out with your fingers, go ahead and do that. And then clip it in place. Do the same on the other side, clipping that D-ring strap to the other side seam. Now we're going to go sew these clipped side tabs down at 1/4 inch seam allowance. So once you have these side tabs basted down, go ahead and put this to the side. Now we're going to work on the lining, so grab your lining panel pieces and your facing panel pieces. We'll just work on them one at a time. If you want to line these up exactly, let's go ahead and find the midpoint mark along the top of our lining panel and the bottom of our facing panel. So we're just going to fold along that top edge and then press, and you can mark or clip here to find that midpoint mark. And then we're going to do the same thing on the bottom of our facing panel. Now we're going to take our facing panel and lay it right side down, lining it up with the top edge of our lining panel. Line up your midpoint marks first if you made them, and then go ahead and clip out to the sides of the panels. Go ahead and do this for your other lining panel and facing as well. Now let's take both of these to the sewing machine and sew along the clipped edges at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once you have the facing sewn onto the lining, we're going to press it so that the seam is behind the lining panel. So I just lay my lining panel wrong side up and then fold it up, and then that seam will naturally just go behind it. If you're using waterproof canvas for your lining, this might put up a bit of a fight. Just do your best to get that seam behind the lining panel and press. Go ahead and do the same with your other lining panel. Once you have these pressed, we're going to take this back to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch on the lining panel 1/4 of an inch below the seam. Alright, once you have these stitched on, just pick one of these lining panels to work on now. Put your lining panel to the side and grab your remaining pocket panel. We're going to attach this pocket panel to the lining the same way we did to the front of the bag. So lay your pocket panel wrong side up. Now let's find the midpoint of this top edge of our pocket panel. So I'm just going to fold along that top edge and then clip the midpoint. And once again, I'm going to mark 1 inch down from that top edge and draw a parallel line to that top edge with any sort of fabric marking tool. And then I'll use that line to draw another line that is 3/8 of an inch down, parallel to the top edge and that line. And then I'm going to line up the 3.5 grid line mark on my midpoint mark, and then just line up any of the grid marks along the top seam. I'm just trying to draw a straight line here. And then 7 inches away from that vertical line, I'll draw another vertical line in my little rectangle. And now I'm just going to draw the midpoint between these lines, and then I will eyeball a triangle. There we go. Now grab your lining panel and we want to find the midpoint of that top edge. So once again, I'm just going to fold it in half and then pinch and clip that midpoint mark. Take your lining panel right side up, and she gives you the measurement in the pattern of how far down to go, so use your ruler to do that. And I like to line up one of my grid point marks with my midpoint mark just so I know that's the midpoint. Take your pocket panel and lay it right side down. Line up the midpoint of your pocket panel with the midpoint mark of your ruler. And then if you want, you can use pins here, or you could also use double-sided tape to just hold it all together. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're just going to sew along this 3/8 of an inch by 7 inch rectangle, just tracing it. Once you have this stitched on, grab your seam ripper and then just rip along that midpoint line you marked enough to get your scissors in there, and then cut along that midpoint mark all the way to the tip of your triangle, and then follow the diagonal edges as close as you can to the corner of your rectangle. Do the same on both sides. Once you have this hole cut, you can push your pocket panel through it so that the wrong side of the pocket panel is against the wrong side of the lining. And I like to just finger press these seams before I press it with the iron. Just want to get everything as straight as possible. Once I have one edge finger pressed, I like to just press that edge real quick with my iron. If you're working with waterproof canvas, it's a little bit tricky. Now I'm going to do the same thing on this bottom edge. So once you have this opening pressed, we're going to prep our zipper. So once again, I'm going to cut my zipper tape to 9 inches just to make sure I have plenty of room. Don't forget to attach your zipper pull. And then I'm going to grab my double-sided tape and line up that tape on the very edge of each of the long sides of my zipper tape. All right, now you can peel off the bottom tape from your double-sided tape. Take your lining panel and center that opening over your tape, and then I just push it down on the bottom edge first and try to center my zipper. Once you have the bottom edge pressed down onto the tape, you can flip it up and then remove the paper from the other side of your zipper tape, and then just gently center and push down that top edge of your fabric onto the tape. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and top stitch along this rectangle on the lining fabric at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So you can see I just went ahead and top stitched my label on here while I was at the sewing machine. I always forget to add this to bags, so it goes where it goes. All right, and so just like we did on the front, we're going to flip our lining wrong side up so that we see the back of the zipper. Take your pocket panel and fold it all the way up, and then you should be able to just feel the bottom of your zipper tape, and we're just gonna wrap our pocket panel around that zipper tape and clip. So we're not clipping any of the lining fabric or anything like that. It's just the pocket panel and the zipper tape. And now pull that clipped edge towards one side so that your lining and your pocket on the other side. And now we're going to sew along this clipped edge anywhere between an 1/8 and a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Make sure you're not sewing on the lining panel here, just the pocket panel and that zipper tape. So once you have that bottom seam stitched in place, go ahead and take your pocket panel and pull it so that it's right sides together, and line up that bottom short edge with the top short edge, and then just clip together. Now let's take this to the sewing machine and sew along this clipped edge at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Like before, I like to sew with the lining side up, and then that way I can move it out of the way and sew around the pocket just like that. That just makes sure I don't accidentally sew through my lining panel. So your lining panel should now look like this with your zipper in and everything put together. So now we're going to install the snaps on the top of our lining panels. Go ahead and grab your magnetic snaps and your washers. Grab the pattern piece for piece D, and on it is this little bullseye right here. That's where you want to install your snap. So what you do is just line it up with the top edge of your lining panel. Grab your fabric marking tool and then just mark inside that dot on your pattern piece. Then grab your washer and center that dot on the circle in the middle of your washer, and then just draw the lines in the oblong spaces on the sides. Now grab a seam ripper and then just very gently rip along those marked lines. Grab your other lining panel and do the exact same thing. Now grab your stabilizer of choice. I have Decovil Light here, And you want to cut out 1 inch by 1 inch rectangles. I just kind of eyeball it. It just needs to be big enough for these washers. And what we're going to do is we're going to fuse this over the slits that we just made. So on the back of our fabric, on the wrong side, we'll just fuse this over those slits. So I like to just fuse it on the back first, and then flip it over and fuse it on the front. Do the same with your other lining piece. So then grab your lining and then just re-slit along those marked lines. Just be very careful. You're just pushing your seam ripper through these slits that you already made. What we're doing now is just creating those same slits in the Decoville Light. This will just prevent your quilt cotton from ripping easily, since this will get more use than other parts of the bag. Now, it's totally up to you which side you put everything on. And insert that into one of your slits, just like this. Grab your washers, put the washer over the prongs, and then pull the prongs apart. There you go. Let's go ahead and do the same thing, pushing the other magnetic snap, and then the washer on there, and then pull apart your tabs. So now we're going to build the lining very similar to how we build the exterior. Take your lining panels and lay them down right sides together. If you want, you can actually put together your magnetic snap to help keep everything in place. The first part I like to line up are the seam between the top and the bottom of my lining panels. So I just like those to be lined up in the same spot. I clip that, and then I'll clip the rest of the side for my lining panels. Repeat this step on the other side of your lining, and then let's clip this bottom edge as well. Now on this bottom edge here, you're going to want to mark an 8-inch opening. So just center this as best you can. A nice big opening will make birthing this bag easier. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and sew along the sides at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to sew along the bottom as well at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Just make sure you leave the spot between the opening unsewn. Make sure you backstitch really well at these corners and at the top and by the opening of the bottom of your bag. So once you have the sides and the bottom sewn, you can go ahead and trim down the seam allowance if you'd like. Since I'm using this waterproof canvas, it gets a little bulky on the seams, so trimming it down works really well. When you're trimming the bottom, don't trim the seam allowance where you didn't sew. So I'm just going to trim right here on the edges where I sewed, but this middle section I'll leave at the 3/8 inch seam allowance. That'll make it easier to close after we turn the bag out. So just like we did before, we're gonna poke our fingers into those corners and pull them out, and then just rotate the seams in opposite direction. Remember, if you pull the whole part open, it makes it much easier. So we want this top edge here to be as flat as possible. And just let those seams hug each other in opposite directions and clip along that raw edge. Do the same on the other side as well. Welcome to trim down these corners if you like. I'm going to leave it because I feel like it gives it a better box look. Okay, so keep your lining so that it's wrong size out and open up the top. Grab your exterior of your bag and we're going to insert this into the lining so that they're right sides together. If you have a preference on where the inside pocket is with regards to the outside pocket, give that a thought right now. I actually like them to be on opposite sides, so I'm going to insert this so that the side of my exterior that does not have a pocket is up against the side of my lining that does have the pocket, but it's completely up to you. So once you have the exterior inside, line up those side seams first. So find the side seams of the lining and the side seams of the exterior and make sure those are in the same spot. If your D-ring is flipped up like this, go ahead and flip it back down so you don't accidentally hit it with your needle. So let's clip those side seams first, and then we'll clip the rest of the top of the bag. Once you have that edge clipped, go ahead and sew around the entire top of this bag at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. When I go over these side seams here where the D-rings are, I'm going to go over it once, backstitch over the entire D-ring, and go over it a second time. You really want to make sure that these D-rings are stitched well so that they don't rip the bag at any point during use. once you have the entire top edge sewn, let's go ahead and turn the bag right side out. So just pull that exterior through the opening in the lining. All right, so then pull the lining out all the way and use your hands to poke out those corners. Now we just need to close up this hole and like talking hello. Okay, so you can just stick your fingers into this hole and kind of tug a little bit and just roll the edges down so that the raw seams are hidden. And then just clip along this edge. Now let's take this to the sewing machine and top stitch along this clipped edge about an 1/8 to 1/4 inch seam allowance. We just want to close this hole. Once you have the bottom closed up, now all we have to do is push the lining into the exterior bag so that they're wrong sides together. Here we go. And it definitely seems like the waterproof canvas as lining is helping the bag have a little bit more firmer of a shape. So now what we want to do is roll and straighten out this seam up top. So I just kind of roll it with my fingers. You can press this with an iron, but I find clips work just as well. So I'm just rolling like every inch or so to keep it nice and straight up here and then clipping it. All right, now we just have to top stitch around this clipped edge. So I'm going to top stitch at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and then do a second row of top stitching at about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. One top stitching row is enough. I find when top stitching, it's easiest to top stitch from the inside of the bag. So just to make sure my top stitching thread ends up on the outside, I'm going to turn my bag so that it's lining side out. So now as lining side out, then I'll top stitch from the inside of the bag all the way around. Like I said, 1 or 2 times around, whatever you feel comfortable with. Once you have that top stitched, if you turned your bag lining side out, go ahead and turn it right side out again, or exterior side out. And there we go. Your bag portion is now done. Isn't this just so adorable? It's such a sweet, small size. All right, go ahead and put this to the side while we finish up the strap. So she gives you the lengths to cut of your fabric if you don't have one nice long piece of fabric. So you're just gonna cut 2 shorter pieces of fabric and then we'll sew them together. So take one of your short edges of fabric, right side up, and grab the other one and do it right side down. And then just line them up perpendicular like this on one of the corners. I like to mark on the top fabric where the bottom edge of the bottom fabric is, just like that. And then I can just grab my ruler and draw a line going diagonally from the top left corner of the top fabric to that mark towards the bottom right. And then you can just clip the corner so that it stays in place. And now let's just sew along this marked line. Once you have that line sewed, you can just trim this down so that it's about 1/4 of an inch towards the triangular edge so that you have it just like this. Now, what you can do is fold these out so that they're both right sides up. And you can see we have this diagonal line here. So now what you can do is press this seam open. If you're using vinyl, you're just gonna have to finger press this. And then we're gonna go to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew an 1/8 of an inch away on each side of this seam. If you're using vinyl like I am, you're just gonna have to kind of keep checking to make sure it's not folded in the wrong direction. But what we're trying to do is top stitch these seams down to their own vinyl pieces. So now that you have a nice long strip for your strap, what we want to do now is mark the midpoint line. If you're using quilt cotton, you can just fold this in half and press it. Since I'm using vinyl, I'm going to be marking it. So I'm going to be marking 2 inches in from the long edge. And I'm gonna go along the entire length of the strap, marking the midpoint. Once you have that midpoint marked, all you have to do is fold those long raw edges up, wrong sides together to meet that midpoint. Again, if you're using cool cotton here, you can press. I am going to use clips to hold this in place. And go along both long edges, folding up to meet that midpoint mark. So if you want to hide these short edges over here, just unclip the very short edge and then fold it in anywhere between 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch, just like that. And then you can clip those and then refold those long edges. You can see this way it's just all of the raw edges will be enclosed. You can go ahead and do this on the opposite short edge as well. All right, once you have it clipped just like this, now all you have to do is fold it hot dog style up so that those clipped edges come together. And then make sure you adjust your short edges if you folded those in. And this way all of the raw edges are hidden. So now I'm going to take my strap to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew around all 4 edges, the short edges and the long edges, at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Since I'm using this kind of sticky vinyl, I'm going to try using my walking foot at the sewing machine. Maybe that will make it a little bit easier to sew. Otherwise, tissue paper and a Teflon foot work great. If you want these thicker straps and you don't want to work with vinyl, I highly suggest you use cork. Cork sews beautifully. Once you have your strap all sewn, grab your hardware, and the first piece we're going to install is our slider. So take one end of your strap and insert it into the bottom of your slider, up towards the top. Put that same end down through the other side of your slider from the top down, just like this. And now we really only want to leave about 1 inch to 1.5 inches here, so you don't have to leave that much out. So the goal here is this end is just going to hold the slider in place. I will be using a rivet to hold this in place, but I'm also going to stitch it down. So if you want, you can just use your sewing machine and create a little rectangle on the bottom of this tab right here to hold the slider in place. I'm going to just stitch 1 row right next to the edge of the slider right here to hold the fabric close to the slider, and then I'm going to add a rivet on the bottom edge right here. When sewing next to the slider, I like to use a zipper foot just so I can get nice and close to it. So I'm going to be using my cam snap press to install rivets today. I use 2 die sets with this. One is this 2.5mm punch hole die set, and then I'm using a 10mm rivet press. So first I'm going to insert my hole punching die. And what I do is I just kind of eyeball this, but I'm going to poke a hole right in the middle of this little bottom rectangle right here by where I sewed. So you can see there's my hole right there, and that's where I'm going to insert my rivet. So now I'm going to change out my die and insert my 10mm die. And I have these 9mm medium-sized rivets from Emmeline Bags. And your rivet set just has a male end and a female end. I insert the male end on one side, the female end on the other. You can snap it into place before you press it on the die. And then just put it in your rivet press and press down. This is completely optional, but it offers a really pretty finished look to your straps. So now let's add our swivel hooks. With your strap wrong side up, go to the opposite end of your strap. Take your swivel hook and insert it upside down so that it's pointing down and the bottom of the swivel hook is on the wrong side. And then take this end and pull it all the way over to your slider and insert it on the side pointing towards the strap from the bottom up. Give yourself a good amount of slack. And then insert it on the opposite side from the top down. There you go. So on one side you should have your strap with nothing on it, and then your slider, and then when you pull this you should have your swivel hook pointing out. So it should look just like this. Now we're just gonna add the opposite swivel hook to this unattached end. So take your swivel hook and insert it on that end, pointing up. So it should be pointing up in the same side as your slider, just like this. Fold down that edge about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. And just like before, I'm just gonna sew right next to this swivel hook using my zipper foot to get nice and close. All right, and just like we did with that slider, we're just going to punch a hole on the end of this strap here. If you wanted to, you could just stitch this down at your sewing machine. You don't need to add a rivet, but I'm just gonna punch a hole here and put a rivet right in the center of this little stitched rectangle. All right, are you ready to see it? It needs a strap. Hold on, let's put the strap on it. So here is our fantastic strap. I just love a crossbody. I love a small, basic crossbody because it's something you can grab quickly when you're going somewhere small. You're just popping over to the grocery store, popping to a friend's house, going to market, going something like that where you don't need to carry a lot of stuff, but you want to carry the essentials. This is such a sweet, sweet bag. Look at these colors. I had a little bit of trouble with the vinyl, I'm not gonna lie. We've got a little bit of puckering here, but all in all, it looks so good. I love how bright this orange is with how bright this Hapa fabric is. Oh, look at that. Look at that color. It's so pretty. So this is a great, great pattern. I would say it's beginner friendly, but more confident beginner. I think the hardest part is honestly top stitching around the top here. That's a little bit tricky because it's not small, but it's just a little challenging. Out of the 3 different fabric combinations I did, I would say my favorite is probably the waterproof canvas as your exterior. Then use whatever you want for the pocket. You can use vinyl, you can use quilt cotton, but the waterproof canvas as the exterior works really, really well. It holds its shape really nicely. You don't have anything sagging anywhere. You don't have to worry about the Decoville light or any sort of stickier, firmer interfacing and the challenges that that presents whenever you're sewing over it. Here was our quilt cotton with Decoville light. This one holds its shape very, very well, but the Decoville light is a little bit more challenging because you are sewing over it quite often. And then in today's version, we use quilt cotton, and for the most part, it works really, really well. That waterproof canvas on the inside definitely helps with the support. The one thing is the band up top is just quilt cotton, so you can see my straps kind of hang down on the side. Versus on this bag where you see the sides hold up really nicely on their own. When you use quilt cotton, they're going to kind of sag a little bit more because they don't have that firm support that they need in order to stay up like they did with the waterproof canvas. So it's totally your choice. Use what you have, but if I were to make it again and to try to make it as easy as possible, waterproof canvas for the exterior, some sort of really fun print of vinyl or quilt cotton for that front pocket, and then quilt cotton for the lining. So I hope that today's tutorial inspires you to go out and make a Kaitlin purse. It's an adorable, adorable pattern. I do have a coupon code for this pattern. It does have an expiration date. Make sure you check the description where I will have a link for the pattern as well as all the information on the discount. If you make this bag and you share it on social media, make sure you tag Kandou Crafts, but also make sure you tag me. I want to see what you're making. There's so many other variations we could do with this bag, and I can't wait to see your version. I hope that you're having a great day. I hope you have a great rest of the week. Get out there and make something. Bye!